She crossed 1,000 miles to marry a stranger, only to find him in chains, his ranch in ruins, his fortune stolen, and his reputation destroyed. Stranded in the brutal Montana wilderness with no money, no protection, and nowhere left to run, Clara Whitmore was supposed to disappear quietly. But the frozen mountains had other plans, and so did the silent rancher who watched her refuse to break. If you want to see how a woman the world dismissed as too quiet, too soft, too fragile, became the one thing the frontier couldn't destroy, stay with me until the end. And when you do, hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story travels. The morning Clara Whitmore left Briar Glen, Vermont, no one came to see her off. She stood alone on the train platform with a single worn trunk at her feet, the early autumn wind cutting through her thin coat. Around her, families embraced, children laughed, porters shouted directions over the hiss of steam engines. But Clara stood silent in the center of it all, invisible as she had always been. 26 years old, unmarried, unwanted. She pulled her shawl tighter and stared at the ticket in her gloved hand. Montana Territory, Owen Mercer, Willow Ridge. 3 words that represented everything she didn't know and couldn't predict. 3 words that were still better than staying. Miss Whitmore? Clara turned. Mrs. Adelaide Frost stood behind her, lips pressed into that familiar line of disapproval. She was flanked by 2 other library board members, both women whose donations kept the building running and whose opinions kept Clara's life small. Mrs. Frost, Clara's voice came out barely louder than the wind. I wanted to see you before you left. Mrs. Frost adjusted her gloves with sharp, precise movements. To ensure you understand the finality of your decision. Clara said nothing. There was nothing to say. The library board had already made their decision weeks ago, though they'd been careful not to tell her directly. She'd overheard it through the door of the reading room, how they needed someone with more presence, someone who could represent the institution properly, someone who wasn't so difficult to hear, someone who wasn't Clara. The position has been filled, Mrs. Frost continued, as if Clara didn't already know. Miss Pemberton will take over next Monday. She's quite animated. The children adore her. Unlike you. The unspoken words hung in the cold air. Clara nodded once. I hope she'll be very happy. Mrs. Frost's expression softened slightly, though not with kindness, with pity, which was worse. You could have stayed, you know, found something else. There are positions for women like you, seamstress work, laundry, something manageable. Women like you. Broken, quiet, unmarriageable. I've made my choice, Clara said softly. To marry a complete stranger, Mrs. Frost's voice sharpened. A man you've exchanged 4 letters with? A rancher in the wilderness who could be anyone? Clara, this is madness. Maybe it was. Probably it was. But madness was still better than disappearing slowly in a town that had already decided she didn't matter. The train whistle blew. Clara picked up her trunk, lighter than it should have been, containing a life that fit into one small box, and turned toward the platform steps. Goodbye, Mrs. Frost. She didn't look back. The train journey west took 5 days. Clara spent most of it pressed against the window, watching the landscape transform from rolling green hills to flat prairies to jagged mountains that seemed to scrape the sky itself. The other passengers talked and laughed, formed temporary friendships, shared meals. Clara ate alone, slept alone, existed in the careful silence she'd perfected over years of being overlooked. She reread Owen's letters until the paper softened at the folds. Dear Miss Whitmore, I was pleased to receive your response to my advertisement. You sound like a sensible woman, which is exactly what I need. Life here is not easy, but it is honest work and good land. I own a cattle ranch outside Willow Ridge, Montana Territory, 300 acres with a main house, barn, and stable. I am 34 years old, in good health, and of steady temperament. I do not drink to excess, and I attend church regularly. I will not lie to you. I need a wife because this territory is hard on a man alone. I need someone to manage the household, help with accounts, and provide companionship. In return, I can offer you security, respect, and a home of your own. If you are still interested, I will send train fare and meet you at the station in Willow Ridge on October 15th. Respectfully, Owen Mercer. The letters that followed had been shorter, more practical. Details about the house, questions about her health, her education, her ability to cook and sew. Nothing about love or affection or anything resembling warmth. But Clara hadn't expected warmth. She'd expected exactly what Owen offered: security, respect, and a home of her own. It was more than Briar Glen had ever given her. On the 5th day, the train pulled into Willow Ridge. Clara stepped onto the platform and immediately understood that she had left civilization behind. The station was barely more than a wooden shack with a painted sign. The town itself looked like it had been carved out of the mountains by sheer stubbornness. A single dirt street lined with rough buildings, horses tied to hitching posts, men in dusty work clothes moving with the kind of purposeful exhaustion that came from manual labor. And standing at the edge of the platform, holding his hat in both hands, was Owen Mercer. Clara recognized him from the single photograph he'd sent. Tall, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, with dark hair and serious eyes. He looked older than 34, tired, but respectable enough in his pressed shirt and dark trousers. She walked toward him slowly, her trunk dragging behind her. Owen's expression didn't change as she approached. No smile, no warmth, just careful assessment. "Miss Whitmore." "Mr. Mercer." Clara's voice came out thin in the mountain air. They stood there for a long moment, two strangers trying to figure out what they'd agreed to. "You're smaller than I expected," Owen said finally. Clara wasn't sure how to respond to that. She was average height, average build, average in every unremarkable way. "I'm sorry?" "It's fine." He reached for her trunk. "We'll make it work. The wagon's this way." He turned and walked without waiting to see if she followed. Clara stood frozen for just a second, watching this man, her future husband, stride away like she was cargo he'd just collected. Then she forced her feet to move and followed him down the platform toward a dusty wagon hitched to two tired-looking horses. Owen loaded her trunk without ceremony and gestured toward the wagon seat. "Climb up." Clara gathered her skirts and pulled herself onto the hard wooden bench. Owen settled beside her, took up the reins, and clicked his tongue. The horses started forward with a jolt that nearly knocked Clara sideways. They rode in silence. The town disappeared behind them quickly, replaced by endless rolling hills dotted with sage and scrub pine. The road, if it could be called a road, was barely more than wagon ruts cutting through wild grass. Mountains rose in the distance, sharp and snow-capped, even in October. After 20 minutes, Clara found her voice. "How far is the ranch?" "Hour and a half," Owen said without looking at her. "Maybe 2, depending on the horses." More silence. Clara tried again. "Your letters mentioned you raise cattle?" "Some." "How many?" "Enough." She waited for him to elaborate. He didn't. The sun moved lower toward the mountains. The air grew colder. Clara pulled her shawl tighter and told herself this was just nervousness. Owen was a practical man, reserved. Once they reached the ranch, once she proved herself useful, things would improve. They had to improve. Finally, as the light turned gold and long shadows stretched across the prairie, Owen spoke again. "I need you to understand something before we get there." Clara turned toward him. His jaw was tight, his hands gripping the reins harder than necessary. "I didn't lie in my letters," he said slowly. "But I didn't tell you everything either." Something cold settled in Clara's stomach. "What do you mean?" Owen was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "The ranch isn't doing as well as I said. Haven't had a good season in 2 years. Drought killed half the herd last summer. I've been making investments, trying to turn things around." "What kind of investments?" "Mining." He said it flat, like the word tasted bad. "There's silver in these mountains. Real silver. I bought shares in the Copperhead mine 6 months ago. Good shares. The foreman said—" He stopped abruptly. Clara waited, heart beating faster now. "What did the foreman say?" "Nothing. Never mind." Owen's voice turned hard. "Point is, things are tight right now, but once the mine pays out, we'll be fine. Better than fine. You'll have everything I promised." Clara stared at him, at the tight line of his shoulders, at the way he wouldn't meet her eyes. "How tight?" she asked quietly. "We'll manage." "Owen, we'll manage." His tone left no room for argument. "You'll do your part, I'll do mine, and in 6 months we'll be sitting comfortable. That's all you need to know." He clicked his tongue and the horses moved faster, as if he could outrun the conversation. Clara turned back toward the mountains and felt the cold settle deeper. She'd crossed 1,000 miles to marry a man who'd already lied to her. A man who'd bet their future on silver that might not exist. A man who looked at her like she was one more problem to manage instead of a person to build a life with. But what choice did she have now? None. She had no money for a return ticket, no home to return to, no one who cared if she disappeared into the Montana wilderness. So she sat silent beside Owen Mercer as the wagon rolled toward a future that was already crumbling before she even arrived. The ranch appeared just as the sun touched the mountains. It wasn't what Clara expected. Owen's letters had described a main house, a barn, and a stable. What she saw was a sagging two-room cabin with a crooked chimney, a barn that leaned dangerously to one side, and a corral fence held together with rope and hope. The land around it was brown and dusty, dotted with sage and not much else. No garden, no flowers, no sign that anyone had tried to make this place feel like home. Owen pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down without helping her. This is it. Clara sat frozen on the bench, staring at the cabin. This was what she'd traded everything for. "Come on," Owen said impatiently. "It's getting dark." She forced herself to climb down, her legs shaky from hours of sitting. Owen grabbed her trunk and headed toward the cabin without waiting. Clara followed slowly, her boots stirring up dust that caught in her throat. Inside was worse. The main room held a rusted stove, a rough wooden table, 2 chairs, and nothing else. No curtains, no rugs, no books or pictures or anything resembling comfort. A doorway led to what must be the bedroom. Clara could see the edge of an unmade bed through the gap. Owen dropped her trunk on the floor with a heavy thud. Kitchen's here, bedroom's there, outhouses behind the barn, water pumps by the corral, needs priming sometimes, but it works. Clara stood in the center of the room, trying to process what she was seeing. Owen watched her with something like defensiveness in his eyes. "It's not fancy, but it's solid. Roof doesn't leak. Stove works. That's more than most folks have out here." "It's fine," Clara heard herself say. The words came out automatic, the same way she'd spent years making herself small and agreeable. "It's fine." "Good." Owen moved toward the door. "I've got to check the horses before dark. There's beans in the cupboard and some bacon. Fire's easy to start if you know what you're doing." He left before she could respond. Clara stood alone in the dim cabin, listening to his boots crunch across the yard outside. Then she sat down slowly on one of the chairs and stared at her hands folded in her lap. She'd imagined this moment so many times on the train. The moment she'd arrive at her new home. She'd pictured Owen showing her around, awkward but kind. She'd pictured making dinner together, learning each other's rhythms, starting the careful work of building something together. She hadn't pictured this. The sun set. The cabin grew darker. Clara didn't move to light a lamp. She just sat there in the gathering shadows, wondering what exactly she'd done to her life. Eventually, Owen came back inside, stomping dirt off his boots. He glanced at her, still sitting in the same chair, unmoving, and frowned. "You didn't start dinner?" "No." Clara's voice was barely audible. "I didn't." "Why not?" She didn't have an answer. Or maybe she had too many answers and none of them would matter. Owen's frown deepened. "Clara, I need you to understand something. I don't have time to coddle you. This is a working ranch. Everyone pulls their weight. That includes you." "I know." "Do you?" He crossed his arms. "Because right now you're sitting in the dark like some kind of lost child." Something flickered in Clara's chest. Not anger exactly, but something close to it. Something that had been building since the train platform in Briar Glen. She stood up slowly. "You lied to me." Owen's expression went flat. "I told you the truth that mattered. You told me you owned a successful ranch. You told me you could provide security. You told me, and I will." His voice rose slightly. "Once the mine pays out, I will. But right now I need a wife who can handle reality, not some fragile thing who falls apart the first time things aren't perfect." Fragile thing. The words hit exactly where they were aimed. Clara felt something crack inside her, the careful composure she'd maintained for so long, the quiet acceptance she'd worn like armor. She looked at Owen Mercer, this stranger she'd agreed to marry, and saw exactly what he thought of her. The same thing everyone in Briar Glen had thought. Too quiet, too soft, too fragile to matter. "I'll make dinner," she said quietly. Owen nodded, satisfied. "Good. I'll be outside." He left again. Clara stood alone in the dark cabin and felt the weight of her choices settle around her like chains. Then she walked to the cupboard, found the beans and bacon Owen mentioned, and started building a fire in the stove with hands that only shook a little. Because what else could she do? Ensuite, the first week passed in a blur of work and silence. Clara learned the rhythms of the ranch quickly. Wake before dawn, start the fire, make coffee, and whatever breakfast could be scraped together from their dwindling supplies. Owen would eat without speaking, then disappear into the hills to check on cattle that barely existed. Clara would clean, mend, try to organize the chaos of the cabin into something resembling order. They barely spoke. At night, Owen would come back exhausted and filthy, eat whatever Clara had prepared, then collapse into bed. Clara slept on a pallet she'd made on the floor of the main room, wrapped in a thin blanket that didn't keep out the cold. They hadn't discussed the marriage ceremony. Owen hadn't mentioned finding a preacher or making things official. Clara didn't ask. Some part of her was grateful for the delay. It meant she was still technically free to leave, even if she had nowhere to go. On the 8th day, everything changed. Clara was hanging laundry on a rope strung between two posts when she heard horses approaching fast. She turned and saw 3 riders coming up the road, kicking up dust. Owen emerged from the barn, his expression going hard when he saw them. The lead rider pulled up sharply, his horse dancing sideways. He was older, maybe 50, with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest. "Owen Mercer?" Owen's jaw tightened. "That's me. I'm Sheriff Dawson. I need you to come with me." "For what?" "The Copperhead mine collapsed 2 days ago." The sheriff's voice was flat, professional. "Killed 16 men. The investigation found that the support beams were rotted through. Owner cut costs, pocketed the money, and lied about safety inspections." Clara felt the ground tilt beneath her. Owen's face went pale. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't." "You were a primary investor," the sheriff interrupted, "which makes you legally responsible for the debts and damages. The mine owner's gone, probably ran for California. That leaves you." "I didn't do anything," Owen's voice cracked. "I just bought shares. I didn't have anything to do with—" "You profited from negligence that killed 16 men." The sheriff's expression didn't change. "Judge says that makes you complicit. You're under arrest pending trial." "No." Owen took a step back. "No, this is insane. I didn't—" One of the other riders moved his horse forward, cutting off Owen's escape. The sheriff dismounted slowly, pulling handcuffs from his belt. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Clara watched frozen as Owen's face went through a series of emotions: panic, anger, desperation. His eyes found hers across the yard. "Clara," his voice was raw. "Clara, tell them. Tell them I'm a good man. I wouldn't—" But Clara didn't know if he was a good man. She'd known him for 8 days, 8 days of silence and lies and disappointment. The sheriff cuffed Owen's wrists with efficient movements. "What about the property?" "Seized," one of the other men said, consulting a paper. "To be sold at auction for damages and restitution to the families." Owen's face went white. "Everything?" "Everything." They pulled him toward one of the horses. Owen twisted back, looking at Clara with something close to panic. "Stay here. Stay at the ranch. Once this gets cleared up, once they realize I didn't do anything wrong—" "Mr. Mercer," the sheriff said quietly, not unkindly, "there's not going to be a ranch to come back to. You understand that?" Owen stopped fighting. His shoulders sagged. He looked at Clara one more time, and she saw it clearly. He'd already known. Maybe not about the mine collapse specifically, but about the house of cards he'd built. About the fact that it was all going to fall. And he'd brought her here anyway, married her, or tried to, knowing she'd be dragged down with him. "I'm sorry," Owen said. The words sounded sincere. They also sounded useless. Clara said nothing. The sheriff mounted his horse. The riders turned and headed back down the road with Owen between them, his hands cuffed, his head down. Clara stood alone in the yard, laundry still hanging damp on the line, and watched her future disappear into the dust. The auction happened 3 days later. Clara stood on the porch of the cabin. Not her cabin, never really her cabin. and watched strangers pick through Owen's property like crows on a carcass. The furniture sold first, though there wasn't much of it. Then the tools, the horses, the wagon. Men bid casually, laughing and spitting tobacco, while Clara tried to figure out what came next. She had $17 left from the money she'd brought from Vermont. She had a trunk of belongings and clothes that wouldn't survive a Montana winter. She had no legal claim to anything. They'd never actually married, which meant she was just a woman who'd been living in Owen Mercer's house. No rights, no protection, no nothing. The land sold last. A rancher named Garrett from 2 valleys over bought it for a fraction of what it should have been worth, already planning to absorb it into his own holdings. By sunset, the yard was empty. The cabin was empty. Clara was alone. She sat on the porch steps as the light faded and tried to form a plan. She could use her remaining money for a train ticket back east. But back to what? Briar Glen didn't want her. She had no family. The library position was gone. She could try to find work in Willow Ridge. But doing what? She had no skills the frontier valued. She couldn't shoe horses or skin game or break ground. She was a librarian without a library. You planning to sleep out here? Clara jerked her head up. A man stood at the edge of the yard, leading a horse. He was tall, lean, maybe late 30s, with weathered skin and dark eyes that watched her carefully. He wore work clothes, rough trousers, a faded shirt, boots that had seen years of hard use. The property's been sold, Clara said quietly. I'm leaving. Where to? I don't know yet. The man studied her for a long moment. You're the mail-order bride. It wasn't a question. Clara nodded anyway. Heard what happened? He moved closer, his horse following placidly. Rough situation. Clara said nothing. What was there to say? The man stopped a few feet away. Name's Wade Callahan. I run sheep about 10 miles north of here. Heard Owen got himself arrested. He did. And you got left with nothing. Clara looked down at her hands. Yes. Wade was quiet for a moment. Then, you know anything about books? The question was so unexpected, Clara looked up sharply. What? Books, Wade repeated. Reading, organization, that kind of thing. Yes. I was a librarian in Vermont. Wade nodded like that confirmed something. Thought so. I've seen you around town these past few days. You set up that little reading corner in the Mercantile, the one with the bench and the shelf. Clara had done that on her second day in Willow Ridge, desperate for something familiar, something useful. She'd asked the Mercantile owner if she could organize the scattered books and periodicals people left lying around, maybe create a spot where folks could sit and read. He'd shrugged and said she could do whatever she wanted as long as she didn't get in the way. She hadn't thought anyone noticed. The settlement needs something like that, Wade continued. A real lending library, place where folks can borrow books, get help with reading and writing, maybe store important documents. Territory's growing fast. People need organization. Clara stared at him. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm offering you a job. Wade's voice was steady, matter of fact. Come work at my ranch. I've got a spare room you can use. You'll help with the library project in town. I'll donate the space and the initial books. In exchange, you help around the ranch. Cooking, cleaning, that kind of thing. It's hard work. Winter's coming, and it gets brutal up in the ridge valleys. But it's honest work, and you'll have a roof over your head. Clara's mind reeled. This man, this stranger, was offering her exactly what she needed most. Safety, purpose, a reason to stay. Why would you do this? She asked carefully. Wade looked at her like the question was strange. Because you need help, and I've got room. And because this territory is too hard to survive alone. We all help each other out here. That's how it works. He made it sound simple, practical. Nothing more complicated than fixing a fence or sharing supplies. But Clara had learned not to trust simple offers. I can't pay you, she said slowly. I have $17. That's all. Didn't ask you to pay me. Then what do you want? Wade's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been respect. I want someone who'll work hard and not complain about it. Someone who'll show up when things get difficult instead of running. Can you do that? Clara thought about the past 8 days. About Owen's lies in the collapsed mine and standing alone in the yard while strangers auctioned off her future. She thought about Mrs. Frost's pitying voice. Positions for women like you. Something manageable. She thought about the careful, quiet life she'd lived in Briar Glen, always grateful for whatever scraps people gave her, never asking for more because she'd learned she didn't deserve more. And she thought about the reading corner in the Mercantile, the way a young mother had smiled at her yesterday when Clara helped her write a letter to her family back east, the way an old rancher had tipped his hat when she'd found him a newspaper with grain prices. Small things, but real things. Yes, Clara said quietly. I can do that. Wade nodded once. Good. Get your things. We'll head out while there's still light. He turned and walked back toward his horse without waiting for confirmation, as if her agreement was already settled. Clara stood slowly, looking at the empty cabin one last time. 8 days ago, she'd arrived here expecting security, respect, and a home of her own. Instead, she'd found lies, abandonment, and the edge of complete ruin. But now, somehow, a stranger with steady eyes and a practical offer had given her something Owen never had. A choice. Clara went inside, gathered her trunk, and walked toward Wade Callahan's horse without looking back. The ride north took them into country Clara had never seen. Higher, wilder, where the mountains pressed close on both sides and the valley floor narrowed to a ribbon of grass and sage. Wade rode ahead on his horse while Clara followed in a small wagon he'd hitched up, her trunk secured in the back. They didn't talk. The silence stretched between them, but it felt different from the cold quiet she'd endured with Owen. Wade's silence wasn't hostile. It just was. The sun dropped behind the western peaks, painting everything in shades of amber and violet. Clara gripped the wagon seat and tried not to think about what she was doing, riding into the wilderness with a man she'd met an hour ago, trusting him because she had no other choice. After nearly 2 hours, Wade turned his horse off the main track onto a narrower path that climbed steadily upward. Trees thickened around them, pine and aspen, their leaves already turning gold. The air smelled different here, cleaner, colder. Then the path opened into a broad valley, and Clara saw the ranch. It wasn't like Owen's broken-down property. Wade's place looked like someone actually lived there, worked there, cared about keeping it standing. The main house was bigger than she expected. 2 stories, rough-hewn logs, a stone chimney that rose straight and solid. A long barn stretched to the left, well-maintained with a peaked roof and wide doors. Corrals ran in neat lines behind the barn, and beyond them Clara could see sheep scattered across the hillside, white shapes moving slowly in the fading light. Wade dismounted and tied his horse to a post. "We're here." Clara climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff from the ride. She stood there taking it all in, the tidy yard, the neat fences, the smoke rising from the chimney. It looked like the kind of place Owen had pretended to own. "It's bigger than I expected," she said quietly. Wade started pulling her trunk from the wagon. "Been in my family since the 50s. My father built most of it before he died. I've just been maintaining. You run it alone?" "Got 2 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse." He gestured toward a smaller building near the barn. "They're out with the herd right now. Won't be back until tomorrow." He hefted her trunk easily and started toward the house. "Come on, I'll show you inside." Clara followed him up the porch steps. The front door opened into a large main room with a stone fireplace, worn furniture that looked comfortable rather than decorative, and shelves lined with books. Clara's eyes caught on those immediately, dozens of volumes, organized by subject, spines cracked from use. "You read," she said, surprised. Wade set her trunk down. "Surprised? Most ranchers I've met don't keep libraries. Most ranchers didn't have a schoolteacher mother who believed ignorance was worse than poverty." He moved toward the fireplace and started building up the fire. "She made sure my sister and I could read before we could ride. Said books were the only thing that'd keep us human out here." Clara heard the past tense. "She's gone? 10 years now. Fever took her quick." Wade's hands moved efficiently, stacking kindling. "Kitchen's through there, bedrooms upstairs. There's a spare room at the end of the hall. Used to be my mother's sewing room. It's yours now." "Where's your sister?" Clara asked. Wade went very still for just a moment, then continued building the fire. "Upstairs. She doesn't come down much." The way he said it made Clara stop asking. Wade struck a match and held it to the kindling. Flames caught and spread, filling the room with warm light. He stood and brushed off his hands. "You hungry?" "A little. There's stew from yesterday. Should still be good." He walked toward the kitchen without waiting for a response. Clara stood alone in the main room, taking in the details Wade hadn't mentioned. The mended curtains, the swept floors, the small touches that said someone had tried to make this house feel like home, even when it was just two people living in it. She heard Wade moving around in the kitchen, the clank of a pot, the sound of a fire being stoked. After a moment, she followed and found him ladling thick stew into two bowls. The kitchen was orderly, functional, cleaner than any bachelor kitchen had a right to be. "You cook?" she asked. "Had to learn after Ma died. Sister tried, but..." He trailed off and handed her a bowl. "Eat. Then I'll show you upstairs." They ate standing at the counter, not bothering with the table. The stew was good, better than good, actually. Venison and potatoes and carrots cooked until they fell apart. "This is excellent," Clara said. Wade shrugged. "It's food. Most men can't cook like this. Most men have wives to do it for them." He said it without bitterness, just fact. "I learned or I starved. Simple as that." Clara took another bite, studying him. Wade Callahan was different from any man she'd known. He didn't posture or preen, didn't seem to need acknowledgement or praise. He just moved through the world doing what needed doing, no more and no less. "Why did you really offer me this job?" she asked quietly. Wade looked at her directly. "I told you. Territory needs a library and you need work." "That's not all of it." He was quiet for a long moment, considering. Then, "I've watched this settlement grow for 15 years, seen families arrive with nothing and either make it or break. The ones who make it are the ones who figure out how to help each other instead of just competing for scraps." He set his empty bowl in the sink. "You got dealt a bad hand. Owen Mercer lied to you and left you stranded. Seemed wrong to let you go under when I could help. That's all there is to it." Clara wanted to believe him, but years of disappointment had taught her to look for the catch. "What if I can't do the work?" she asked. "What if I'm not strong enough for ranch life?" "Then you'll get stronger, or you'll figure out different work." Wade's voice was matter of fact. "Either way, you'll have a roof while you sort it out. Winter's coming fast. Nobody should face that alone if they don't have to." He said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Help because you can. Survive together because the alternative is dying alone. Clara felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she'd been carrying since Briar Glen. "Thank you," she said quietly. Wade nodded once. "Come on. I'll show you the room." He led her upstairs to a narrow hallway with 3 doors. He pointed to the first. "That's mine." Then the second. "That's my sister's. She's not well, Clara. She won't bother you, but she probably won't talk to you either. Best to just leave her be unless she comes to you first." Clara wanted to ask what was wrong, but the set of Wade's shoulders told her not to push. "All right." He opened the 3rd door. The room inside was small but clean, with a single bed covered in a faded quilt, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the valley. Someone had left wildflowers in a jar on the windowsill, dried now, but carefully arranged. "This was your mother's," Clara said. "Yes." "You kept it nice." Wade's expression softened slightly. "She deserved that much." He brought her trunk in and set it at the foot of the bed. "Outhouse is behind the house. Water pumps by the kitchen door. If you need anything tonight, just knock. Otherwise, I'll see you at breakfast. 5 o'clock. 5. Clara tried to hide her dismay. Ranch doesn't wait for convenient hours, but Wade's tone wasn't unkind. "You'll get used to it." He left, closing the door quietly behind him. Clara sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the small room. It smelled faintly of pine and old flowers. The quilt was worn but well made, stitched with a pattern of interlocking stars. Someone had loved this room once. Someone had felt safe here. She lay back slowly and stared at the ceiling, exhausted beyond words. 2 weeks ago, she'd been in Briar Glen, invisible and unwanted, but at least certain of where she stood. Now she was in the Montana mountains working for a stranger, sleeping in a dead woman's sewing room, preparing to build a frontier library out of nothing. It should have terrified her. Instead, for the first time since leaving Vermont, Clara felt something almost like hope. Tea. The next morning, Wade woke her by pounding on the door at 4:30. "Up," he called through the wood. "Coffee's on." Clara dragged herself out of bed, fumbled into her clothes in the dark, and stumbled downstairs to find Wade already dressed and moving through the kitchen with efficient purpose. He handed her a cup of coffee without speaking and gestured toward the stove. "Bacon's in the cold box. Eggs, too. Make enough for 5. The hands will be back by 6. Then he was gone, out the door into the pre-dawn darkness. Clara stood alone in the kitchen, coffee cup in hand, and tried to figure out where to start. She found the cold box, a clever wooden contraption that used ice to keep food fresh, and pulled out bacon and eggs. The stove was already hot. She started cooking, her movements clumsy at first, but getting steadier as muscle memory from years of cooking for herself took over. By the time Wade came back in with 2 other men, she had a platter of bacon, a pan of scrambled eggs, and a pot of fresh coffee waiting. The men stopped in the doorway, looking surprised. "Clara, these are my ranch hands," Wade said, "Ben Torres and Jack Hardesty." Ben was younger, maybe 25, with dark hair and an easy smile. "Ma'am." Jack was older, grizzled, with a face that suggested he'd seen too much and found most of it disappointing. He just nodded. "Sit," Wade said. "Eat before it gets cold." They sat. Clara served them and took her own plate to the counter, standing while they ate at the table. The men talked quietly about the herd, which sheep needed watching, which fences needed repair, where the water was running low. Clara listened and tried to piece together the rhythms of this place. When they finished, Ben brought his plate to the sink. "That was real good, ma'am. Best breakfast we've had in months." Wade shot him a look. "My cooking's not that bad." "Didn't say it was bad, boss, just said this was better." Ben grinned and headed for the door. "Come on, Jack, those fences won't fix themselves." The 2 men left. Wade drained his coffee and stood. "I'll be out with them most of the day. You all right here on your own?" Clara nodded. "What do you want me to do?" "Whatever needs doing. Clean, organize, cook dinner for tonight. There's mending in the basket by the fireplace if you run out of work." He paused. "And at some point, go up and check on my sister, Emma. Just knock on the door and let her know there's food if she wants it. She probably won't answer, but try anyway." "All right." Wade started toward the door, then stopped. "Clara, you did good this morning. Thank you." He left before she could respond. Clara stood in the quiet kitchen and felt that strange flutter of hope again. She'd been here less than 12 hours and already she'd done something useful. Already she'd earned a thank you from a man who seemed like he didn't waste words on pleasantries. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The house wasn't dirty, exactly, but it had the worn-down look of a place maintained by people too busy to do more than the minimum. Clara started in the main room, dusting shelves, sweeping floors, straightening furniture. She found Wade's mother's books and spent an hour reorganizing them properly, by subject and then by author. It felt good to work with books again, to create order out of chaos. By mid-morning, the main floor was transformed. Not fancy, but clean and welcoming. Clara made herself a simple lunch and then stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking up toward the second floor. She'd been avoiding it all morning. But Wade had asked her to check on Emma, and Clara was learning that Wade didn't make idle requests. She climbed the stairs slowly and stopped in front of the middle door, hesitated, then knocked gently. "Emma? It's Clara. Wade asked me to check if you need anything." Silence. Clara waited, then tried again. "I made extra lunch if you're hungry. I can leave it outside the door if you'd prefer." Still nothing. Clara stood there for another moment, then turned to go. But as she reached the stairs, she heard it, the soft sound of a door opening behind her. She turned back. A young woman stood in the doorway, thin and pale with dark hair that hung loose around her face. She looked maybe 20, though it was hard to tell. Her eyes were enormous in her gaunt face, shadowed and wary. "Emma?" Clara said softly. The girl nodded once but didn't speak. Clara kept her voice gentle, non-threatening. "I'm Clara. I'm helping Wade around the ranch for a while. He thought you might want lunch." Emma stared at her for a long moment. Then, very quietly, "You're the mail-order bride." "I was. Things didn't work out." "Because of the mine." Clara nodded. "Yes." Emma's gaze was unsettling, too intense, like she was looking at something beyond Clara's surface. "Wade thinks he can save everyone. He can't." "I'm not asking him to save me," Clara said carefully. "Just giving me work until I figure out what's next. Everyone says that. Then they stay. Then they leave when it gets too hard." Emma's voice was flat, emotionless. You'll leave too. Maybe, Clara admitted. I don't know yet. Emma seemed surprised by the honesty. Her expression flickered with something almost like interest. You're different from the others. What others? The women Wade hired before. They all smiled too much, tried too hard to fix things. Emma's mouth twisted. You're not smiling. Clara realized she wasn't. She wasn't performing cheerfulness or warmth or any of the things women were supposed to perform. She was just standing there, being honest. I don't smile when I don't mean it, Clara said quietly. Emma studied her for another long moment. Then, I'll eat in my room. Just leave the plate outside. All right. Emma started to close the door, then stopped. Clara? Yes? Thank you for not pretending. The door closed softly. Clara stood in the hallway, processing what just happened. Emma was damaged. That much was clear. But she wasn't unreachable. She was just protecting herself the only way she knew how. Clara went downstairs, prepared a plate of lunch, and left it outside Emma's door without knocking. When she checked an hour later, the plate was empty. The days fell into a pattern. Clara woke before dawn, made breakfast, cleaned the house, prepared meals, mended clothes, organized supplies. The work was endless and exhausting, but it was also straightforward. No one criticized her quietness. No one said she wasn't doing enough. Wade would nod his approval when he came in for meals, Ben would thank her cheerfully, and even Jack started offering gruff compliments. Emma remained mostly invisible, but every day Clara left lunch outside her door, and every day the plate came back empty. Occasionally Clara would catch glimpses of her, a pale figure watching from an upstairs window, a shadow moving in the hallway late at night, but they didn't speak again. On the fifth day, Wade approached Clara after breakfast. I'm heading into town today. Supply run. You want to come? Clara looked up from the dishes. Is that necessary? Thought you might want to see about the library situation. Talk to folks. Get a sense of what's needed. Clara's heart beat faster. She'd been so focused on survival, on proving herself useful, that she'd almost forgotten the reason Wade had hired her in the first place. Yes, she said. I'd like that. They rode into Willow Ridge mid-morning, the wagon rattling over rough roads. The town looked different in daylight, still rough and unfinished, but more alive than Clara remembered. People moved along the main street, going about their business. Children played in the dirt. Women hung laundry behind buildings. Wade pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the mercantile. I've got business at the blacksmith. You go on and talk to Harrison. He owns this place. Tell him I sent you and that we're serious about the library project. What if he says no? Wade looked at her steadily. Then you convince him to say yes. You're a librarian, Clara. This is your area. He climbed down and walked away, leaving her alone. Clara sat in the wagon for a moment, gathering her courage. Then she climbed down and pushed through the mercantile door. The interior was dim and cluttered, shelves packed with everything from flour to ammunition. A man stood behind the counter, middle-aged, balding, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Help you? He asked. Mr. Harrison, I'm Clara Whitmore. Wade Callahan sent me to discuss the library project. Harrison's expression shifted to something more interested. The librarian heard about you. You're the one who organized that reading corner. Yes, sir. Smart idea. Gets people lingering, which means they spend more money. He came around the counter. Wade mentioned he wanted to fund a proper lending library. What's your plan? Clara hadn't realized she needed a plan. She'd thought Wade was handling the logistics. But Harrison was looking at her expectantly, waiting for her to prove she was worth the investment. She took a breath and reached for the knowledge she'd spent years building. The settlement needs 3 things. First, a central location where people can borrow and return books safely. Second, a basic catalog system so folks can find what they need without searching through piles. Third, someone to help with reading, writing, and document organization. A lot of settlers out here can't read well, and they need help with letters, contracts, and records. Harrison listened, nodding slowly. Makes sense. What do you need from me? Space, Clara said. Just a corner of the store, or even a back room if you have one. Wade's providing the books, and I'll do the work. You'll benefit from increased foot traffic. And if it doesn't work, then you've lost a corner of storage space for a few months. But if it does work, you become the center of community life in this settlement. People remember that. Harrison smiled slowly. You're not as quiet as people said. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. People talk about me? Course they do. Mail order bride abandoned by the crooked rancher? That's good gossip. But most folks figured you'd be gone by now. Nobody expected you to stay. I didn't have anywhere else to go. Sure you did. Could have gone back east. Could have found different work. But you stayed. Harrison crossed his arms, considering. There's a back room I use for overflow stock. Not big, but it's got a window and a door. You can have it. Clara's heart jumped. Really? On one condition, you help my daughter with her reading. She's 8 and smart as a whip, but I don't have time to teach her proper and there's no school yet. You do that? We've got a deal. I can do that, Clara said immediately. Good. Harrison stuck out his hand. We've got an agreement, Miss Whitmore. Clara shook it, feeling the calluses on his palm. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You've got a lot of work ahead of you. Wade came back an hour later to find Clara in the mercantile's back room, already measuring shelves and making lists. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her work. Harrison said yes? He did. Clara looked up, flushed with excitement. Wade, this is perfect. It's small, but it's dry, and it has good light. We can fit at least 200 books in here, maybe more if I organize efficiently. When can you start? As soon as you get the books here. Wade smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, made him look younger. I'll have the first load ready by tomorrow. We'll bring them up together. Clara felt something warm spread through her chest. This was real. This was happening. She was building something that mattered, something that would help people. Thank you, she said quietly, for believing I could do this. Wade's smile faded into something more serious. You did this yourself, Clara. I just gave you the opportunity. You're the one making it real. They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence as the sun dropped toward the mountains. Clara watched the landscape roll past and thought about how much had changed in just 5 days. She'd gone from abandoned and desperate to purposeful and needed, from invisible to seen. Not because anyone had rescued her, because she'd proven she was worth keeping around. That night after dinner, Clara sat in the main room working on catalog cards for the library. Wade sat across from her, mending tack by lamplight. The fire crackled. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Can I ask you something? Clara said quietly. Wade didn't look up from his work. Go ahead. What happened to Emma? Wade's hand stilled. For a long moment, Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then slowly he set down the leather strap he'd been working on. 3 years ago, she was engaged to a man named Thomas Garrett. Good family, solid reputation. Wedding was all planned. Wade's voice was flat, controlled. 2 weeks before the ceremony, Thomas got drunk and showed his real nature. Beat Emma so badly she couldn't walk for a month. When my father tried to press charges, the Garretts paid off the sheriff and Thomas disappeared. We heard later he'd gone to California. Clara's stomach turned. That's horrible. It gets worse. Emma tried to move on, tried to rebuild. But the town blamed her, said she must have done something to provoke him, said she should be grateful he left instead of forcing the marriage. Wade's jaw was tight. She stopped going into town, stopped talking to people. Eventually she just stopped coming downstairs, stopped doing much of anything except existing. And you've been taking care of her. She's my sister. What else would I do? Clara thought about Mrs. Frost and the library board, about Owen Mercer bringing her out here on false pretenses, about every person who'd dismissed her or pitied her or treated her like she was too fragile to matter. The world's not kind to women, she said quietly. Wade looked at her directly. No, it's not. But that doesn't mean we stop fighting it. Is that why you hired me? Because you think I'm like Emma? No. Wade's voice was firm. I hired you because you're not. Emma broke and hasn't figured out how to mend. You bent, but you didn't break. That's the difference. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back. How do you know I won't break? Because you're still here. Because you got off that wagon 5 days ago and started working instead of falling apart. Because you walked into Harrison's mercantile and negotiated space for a library, like you'd been doing it your whole life. Wade picked up his tack work again. That's not fragility, Clara. That's strength. No one had ever called her strong before. Clara looked down at her catalog cards, emotions churning. I don't feel strong. Nobody does. We just keep moving forward anyway. They worked in silence after that, the only sounds the crackling fire and the scratch of Clara's pen on paper. But something had shifted between them, an understanding, a recognition. They were both survivors, and maybe, together, they could build something that lasted. The library opened 2 weeks later. Wade brought the books in 3 wagon loads, volumes from his family collection, books donated by neighboring ranchers, periodicals and newspapers people had been hoarding. Clara spent days organizing them, building a simple card catalog system, creating a checkout ledger. Harrison's daughter Maggie helped after school, her young energy infectious. On opening day, Clara stood in the small back room and watched people filter in. A young mother looking for children's books. An old rancher needing help writing a letter to his son back east. 3 teenagers wanting to borrow penny dreadfuls. A sheep herder from the high country who'd heard there were books in Spanish. Clara helped them all. Quietly, patiently, without fuss or performance. She found books, wrote letters, explained the lending system. She treated everyone who walked through the door like they mattered, like their needs were important. By the end of the day, she'd checked out 17 books and helped write 4 letters. Wade found her that evening, sitting on the floor of the library, exhausted but glowing. How'd it go? 17, Clara said. 17 people borrowed books today. That's good. It's better than good. It's a start. Wade sat down on the floor next to her, his long legs stretched out. They sat there in the lamplight, surrounded by shelves of books, and Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Thank you, she said quietly, for giving me this. Wade looked at her, his dark eyes serious. You gave this to yourself, Clara. I just got out of the way. And maybe he was right. Maybe she'd had this strength all along, buried under years of being told she was too quiet, too soft, too forgettable to matter. Maybe she'd just needed someone to stop talking long enough to let her prove it. The library became Clara's refuge, but the ranch became her proving ground. October bled into November and the temperature dropped hard. Ice formed on water troughs overnight. The wind came down from the high peaks carrying the smell of snow. Wade and the hands worked longer hours, driving the sheep to lower pastures, reinforcing shelters, stockpiling hay and feed. Clara learned to read the weather in Wade's face, the tension in his jaw when clouds gathered wrong, the relief when storms held off another day. She learned other things too, how to cook for men who worked 16-hour days and needed calories more than flavor, how to mend torn canvas in ways that would hold through blizzards, how to preserve what little remained of the fall harvest before the first hard freeze killed everything. The work was relentless, but Clara found she didn't mind. Every task completed was proof she belonged here. Emma remained mostly upstairs, but the empty plates outside her door told Clara she was eating. Sometimes Clara would leave books along with the food. Nothing heavy, just novels and story collections. The books always came back, pages showing signs of being read. It wasn't conversation, but it was contact. 3 weeks after the library opened, Wade came into the kitchen one morning looking grim. Storm's coming, he said. Big one. Ben's father lives up in the high country. He can read weather better than anyone I've known. Says this one's going to hit hard and last days. Clara looked out the window at the clear sky. It looks fine. Won't be by tonight. Wade poured coffee, his movements sharp with tension. We need to get everything secured. I'm keeping the sheep in the lower valley and the horses in the barn. We'll lose some anyway. Always do. But we can minimize it if we prepare right. What do you need me to do? Wade looked at her directly. Keep the house warm and keep food ready. Once this hits, we won't be able to leave the buildings much. Could be 3 days, could be a week. Make sure we have water inside, wood stacked by the door, lamps filled. And check on Emma. Make sure she understands she needs to stay upstairs with her door closed. Heat rises. She'll be warmer up there. Clara nodded. I can do that. I know you can. Wade set down his cup. Clara, if something happens, if the storm gets bad enough that we can't get back to the house, you and Emma stay inside no matter what. You hear me? Even if you see one of us in trouble, you stay inside. Wade, I mean it. Blizzards out here kill people in minutes. You go out trying to help and you're just adding to the body count. His voice was harsh, but his eyes held genuine fear. Promise me. Clara swallowed. I promise. Good. He grabbed his coat. We've got maybe 6 hours. Let's make them count. The next 6 hours were chaos. Ben and Jack brought the sheep down from the upper pastures, herding them into the lower valley where they'd at least have some shelter from rocky outcroppings. Wade moved the horses into the barn and reinforced the doors. Clara hauled water until her arms ached, filled every pot and bucket they owned, stacked firewood inside the mudroom until there was barely room to walk. By mid-afternoon, the sky had turned the color of old bruises. The wind picked up, rattling windows and tearing at the roof shingles. The temperature dropped so fast Clara could feel it through the walls. She went upstairs and knocked on Emma's door. "Emma, can I come in?" A long pause. Then, "Yes." Clara opened the door slowly. Emma sat on her bed, wrapped in a quilt, looking out the window at the darkening sky. "There's a storm coming," Clara said gently. "A bad one. Wade wants you to stay in your room with the door closed. You'll be warmer that way." Emma didn't look away from the window. "I know about blizzards. I brought extra blankets, and I'll leave food and water outside your door so you don't have to come downstairs." "You're afraid." It wasn't a question. Clara considered lying, then decided Emma deserved honesty. "Yes, I've never been through a real mountain storm before." Emma finally turned to look at her. "You'll be fine. The house is solid. Wade built half of it himself after Father died. It won't fall." "What about Wade and the hands?" "They know what they're doing." But Emma's voice was tight. "They'll come back." Clara heard the uncertainty underneath. Emma had already lost so much: her father, her mother, her future, her trust in people. She couldn't afford to lose Wade too. "He will," Clara said firmly. "Wade's too stubborn to let a storm beat him." Emma's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "You're learning." Clara left the blankets and went back downstairs. Through the kitchen window, she could see Wade and the hands making final checks on the barn. The wind was howling now, bending the pine trees nearly horizontal. And then she saw it, the wall of white advancing from the north like a living thing. The storm hit with violence that took Clara's breath away. One moment there was a gray sky and wind. The next there was nothing but white. Snow came down so thick it was like standing inside a cloud. The wind screamed, throwing ice against the windows hard enough that Clara feared the glass would shatter. The door slammed open and 3 figures stumbled inside, covered head to toe in snow. Wade, Ben, and Jack, gasping and shaking. "Kitchen," Wade barked. "Now." They stripped off their outer layers in the mudroom, revealing soaked clothes underneath. Clara already had coffee boiling and towels ready. "Jesus," Ben said through chattering teeth. "That came on fast." "Told you." Jack took the coffee Clara handed him with shaking hands. "Old man's never wrong about weather." Wade moved to the window, staring out at the wall of white. "We got the animals secured just in time. Another 10 minutes and we wouldn't have made it back to the house." Clara felt her stomach drop. 10 minutes. He'd cut it that close. "Don't look at me like that," Wade said without turning around. "This is ranch life. You calculate risks and you take them. We don't have the luxury of playing it safe. You could have died. But we didn't." He finally turned to face her. "We're here. The animals are as safe as we can make them, and now we wait it out. That's how this works." The storm raged for 3 days. Clara had never experienced anything like it. The wind never stopped, a constant howl that got into your bones and made sleep nearly impossible. Snow piled against the house until the first-floor windows were half buried. The temperature inside dropped despite the fire, cold seeping through every crack and gap. They burned through firewood at an alarming rate, and by the second day Clara started rationing it, keeping the fire just high enough to prevent freezing. The men took turns checking the barn. Brief, brutal trips through waist-deep snow to ensure the horses had food and water. Each time one of them went out, Clara held her breath until they came back. Once, Jack was gone so long Wade was pulling on his coat to go after him when the door finally opened and Jack stumbled in, his face gray with cold. "Lost my bearings," he said through numb lips. "Couldn't see the house. Had to feel my way along the fence line." Wade helped him out of his frozen coat, his face grim. "Nobody goes out alone from now on. I don't care if it's just to the barn." On the 3rd day, the wind finally died. The silence was almost worse than the noise had been. Clara stood at the window and looked out at a world transformed. Snow had buried everything. The corral fences were just suggestions under white drifts. The path to the barn had disappeared entirely. The sky was a hard, bright blue, painfully beautiful. Wade came to stand beside her. So, now comes the hard part. What do you mean? We have to dig out, check the animals, see what we lost. His voice was flat, preparing for bad news. 3 days is a long time. Some of the sheep in the lower valley won't have made it. Probably lost some chickens. Maybe worse. Clara turned to look at him. His face was drawn, exhausted. He'd barely slept, spending most of the storm either feeding the fire or worrying about the animals. You did everything you could, she said quietly. Never feels like enough. But he gave her a brief nod. Come on, let's assess the damage. The damage was worse than Clara expected, and not as bad as Wade feared. They lost 18 sheep to the cold, their frozen bodies scattered across the lower valley. The chicken coop had partially collapsed, killing 4 hens. One of the barn doors had been ripped off its hinges, exposing the horses to the worst of the storm for hours before Jack had managed to nail canvas over the opening. But the horses survived, the barn stood, and the house made it through intact. Could have been worse, Ben said as they surveyed the wreckage. Year before you arrived, Wade, we lost half the flock. Wade just nodded, already moving toward the barn with tools. Let's fix what we can before the next one hits. They worked for 2 weeks straight, repairing damage and preparing for more storms. Clara threw herself into the work, hauling debris, cooking massive meals to keep everyone fueled, mending torn canvas and broken tack. At night she fell into bed so exhausted she barely dreamed. The library in town had to close temporarily. The roads were impassable and nobody was making unnecessary trips. But Clara used the time to prepare. She made more catalog cards, organized a system for tracking overdue books, drafted plans for expanding the collection. When the roads finally cleared, she'd be ready. It was during this time that Emma finally came downstairs. Clara was in the kitchen making bread when she heard footsteps on the stairs. She turned and saw Emma standing in the doorway, thin and pale, but dressed and clean. They stared at each other for a long moment. I wanted to help, Emma said quietly. Clara wiped flour from her hands. You sure? I've been useless for 3 years. I'm tired of it. Emma's voice was shaky but determined. I can't promise I'll be good at anything, but I can try. Clara thought about how to respond. Emma didn't need pity or excessive encouragement. She needed to be treated like someone capable of making her own choices. I'm making bread, Clara said simply. You know how to knead dough? Emma nodded. Good. Get over here. They worked side by side in silence, their hands moving through the rhythm of kneading. Emma's movements were tentative at first, like she'd forgotten how to exist in the world. But gradually she relaxed, falling into the familiar pattern. You're different, Emma said after a while. How? The other women Wade hired, they treated me like I was broken, like if they were just nice enough I'd magically get better. Emma's hands pressed into the dough with more force. You don't do that. You're broken, Clara said bluntly. So am I. So is Wade. So is everyone who survived something hard. Being broken doesn't mean you're useless. Emma stopped kneading and looked at her. What broke you? Clara considered the question. Being invisible. Spending my whole life being told I didn't matter because I wasn't loud enough, charming enough, pretty enough. Then coming out here and finding out the man who promised me security had lied about everything. That breaks you in ways people don't see. But you're not invisible now. No, because I stopped waiting for permission to exist. Clara shaped her dough into a loaf. I'm still figuring out what that means, but I'm figuring it out. Emma was quiet for a long time, working the dough. Then, Thomas used to tell me I talked too much, that I asked too many questions, that I needed to be quieter, more agreeable. Her voice was barely audible. So I tried. I tried so hard to be what he wanted, and he beat me anyway. Clara felt anger rise in her chest, hot and fierce. He was a coward who wanted power over someone smaller. That's all it was. It was never about you. Everyone else said it was my fault. Everyone else was wrong. Emma's hands stilled. She looked at Clara with eyes that were too old for her young face. How do you get past it? The anger? The fear? I don't know yet, Claire admitted, but I think maybe you don't get past it. You just learn to carry it better. They finished the bread in silence. When the loaves were in the oven, Emma didn't go back upstairs. She stayed in the kitchen, watching Clara work. And when Wade came in for lunch and saw his sister sitting at the table, his expression was worth more than any words. December arrived with more snow but less violence. The storms were smaller, more predictable. Wade relaxed slightly, confident they'd survive the winter. The library reopened and Clara threw herself back into the work, making the twice-weekly trip to town with Wade whenever weather allowed. Emma started coming downstairs every day, helping with cooking and cleaning. She didn't talk much, but she was present. It was almost peaceful. Then, 2 weeks before Christmas, a rider arrived at the ranch just after dawn. Clara answered the door to find a young man on a lathered horse, his face grave. "I need Wade Callahan," he said. "Now." Wade appeared behind Clara, already pulling on his coat. "What happened?" "Owen Mercer escaped prison last night, killed a guard, and took his horse." The rider's voice was tight. "Sheriff sent me to warn everyone. They think he's headed for the mountains." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. Wade's hand came to her shoulder, steadying. "How long ago?" Wade asked. 12 hours, maybe. They found the guard at dawn." The rider looked at Clara, his expression sympathetic. "He was asking about you, ma'am. Asking where the mail-order bride went. The other prisoners told the sheriff he's been talking about revenge. Blames you for everything that happened." "She didn't do anything," Wade said sharply. "I know that. You know that. Owen Mercer's not thinking straight." The rider gathered his reins. "Sheriff said to lock your doors and keep your guns loaded. Mercer's desperate and dangerous. If he shows up here, don't try to talk to him. Just defend yourselves." He rode off before they could respond. Clara stood in the doorway, frozen. Owen was coming. The man who'd lied to her, abandoned her, left her stranded. He was coming for revenge because somehow, in his twisted thinking, his own failures were her fault. Wade pulled her inside and closed the door. "Ben, Jack, get in here!" The hands came running. Wade explained the situation in quick, efficient sentences. Jack's face went hard. Ben looked scared. "What do we do?" Ben asked. Wade was already moving, pulling rifles down from their rack above the fireplace. "We prepare. Check all the doors and windows. Make sure they're secured. Load every gun we have. Nobody goes anywhere alone. And if Mercer shows up—" "He's not showing up here," Clara said. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "He doesn't know where I am." "He'll find out. Settlement's this small. Everyone knows everyone's business." Wade handed Jack a rifle. "We prepare for the worst and hope for the best." Emma appeared on the stairs, her face white. "What's happening?" Wade looked at his sister, then at Clara, making a decision. "Emma, I need you to do something for me." "What?" "Stay upstairs. If anyone comes to the house, anyone you don't know, you hide in the closet in Ma's old sewing room. You don't come out until I tell you it's safe. Understand?" Emma's eyes were wide with fear, but she nodded. "What about Clara?" "Clara stays with me." Wade's voice left no room for argument. They spent the day fortifying the ranch. Wade nailed boards across the downstairs windows, leaving just enough gap to see out and shoot through if necessary. Ben and Jack checked every gun, cleaned them, loaded them, set them within easy reach. Clara made food that could be eaten cold. They couldn't risk being away from windows to cook if Mercer showed up. As darkness fell, they took up positions. Wade at the front window, Jack at the back, Ben watching the barn. Clara sat at the kitchen table with a rifle she barely knew how to use, her hands shaking. "You ever shot a gun?" Wade asked quietly. "No." He came over and showed her, his hands patient. "Safety's here. You aim like this. Pull the trigger slow, don't jerk it. The kick's going to hurt, but don't let it make you drop the weapon." "I don't want to kill anyone," Clara whispered. "You won't have to." "I will." Wade's voice was gentle but firm. "But I need you to be ready just in case. Can you do that?" Clara looked at the rifle in her hands. 3 months ago, she'd been a quiet librarian in Vermont, invisible and overlooked. Now she was sitting in a Montana ranch house, holding a weapon, preparing to defend herself against a man who wanted her dead for crimes she didn't commit. "Yes," she said, "I can do that." The first night passed without incident, and the second. By the third day, tension had stretched everyone thin. Jack snapped at Ben over something minor. Ben broke a plate and nearly cried from exhaustion. Emma stayed upstairs, barely eating. Clara made coffee and tried to keep everyone fed, but fear sat in her stomach like a rock. Every sound outside made her jump. Every shadow looked like a threat. On the fourth night, Wade found her sitting alone in the kitchen after everyone else had gone to sleep. "You should rest," he said quietly. "Can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see him." Wade sat down across from her. "Owen's probably long gone by now. If he had any sense, he'd have run for California or Oregon. Coming after you would be stupid. He killed a guard to escape. I don't think he's thinking clearly." "No, probably not." Wade was quiet for a moment. "Clara, I want you to know something. If he does come here, if this turns into a fight, you're not alone. We'll protect you." "Why?" The question burst out of her. "Why are you doing this? I'm just someone you hired. You don't owe me anything." Wade looked at her steadily. "You're not just someone I hired. You're part of this place now, part of this family. And we protect our own." Clara felt tears burn her eyes. "I'm not family. Aren't you? You've been living in my mother's sewing room, cooking meals for my sister, running a library that serves the whole settlement. You've survived blizzards and isolation, and now you're sitting here ready to defend this place with a rifle you don't even know how to shoot properly." Wade's voice was gentle. "That sounds like family to me." "I don't know how to be part of a family. Neither do I. My father died when I was 16, my mother 10 years ago, and Emma's been locked in her room for 3 years. We're all just making this up as we go." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "But we're doing it together. That counts for something." His hand was warm, calloused, steady. Clara looked down at it and felt something shift in her chest, a crack in the armor she'd built around herself. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me when everyone else looked through me." Wade squeezed her hand once, then let go. "Get some sleep. I'll keep watch." Clara went upstairs and lay down on the bed in the sewing room, still fully dressed. She didn't expect to sleep, but exhaustion dragged her under, and for a few hours, she found peace. She woke to the sound of gunfire. Clara bolted upright, heart hammering. Outside, someone was shouting. More shots, sharp cracks that echoed off the mountains. She grabbed the rifle and ran for the stairs. Wade was at the front window, gun raised. Jack was at the back. Ben was running across the yard toward the barn, and beyond him, barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness, Clara saw a figure on horseback. Owen. He was thinner than she remembered, wild-eyed, with a gun in each hand. He fired toward the house, the bullet slamming into the wall above Wade's head. Wade returned fire, deliberately shooting wide. A warning, not a killing shot. "Mercer," Wade shouted, "you don't want to do this. Ride out now and maybe the sheriff goes easy on you." "Where is she?" Owen's voice was raw, half mad. "Where's the bitch who ruined my life?" Wade fired again, closer this time. "She's not here. And even if she was, you're not getting to her. Leave now or I put you down." Owen laughed, a horrible sound. "You think I'm afraid of dying? I've got nothing left. She took everything. You took everything yourself when you gambled away your ranch and got 16 men killed. Because the mine was supposed to pay." Owen was screaming now. "It was supposed to work. I would have been rich. I would have given her everything I promised, but she showed up and everything fell apart." "That's not how reality works, Owen." Wade's voice was steady, calm. "You made bad choices. You lied. You got caught. None of that is Clara's fault." "She's here!" Owen kicked his horse forward. "I know she's here. Everyone in town told me. The abandoned bride living at Wade Callahan's ranch like some kind of—" Wade's shot took Owen's hat off. Owen jerked back in the saddle, his horse dancing sideways. He stared at Wade through the window, and for a moment Clara thought he might actually leave. Then he aimed both guns at the house and fired everything he had. Glass shattered, wood splintered. Wade dropped below the window, cursing. Jack fired from the back, catching Owen's horse in the flank. The animal screamed and reared, throwing Owen to the ground. Ben came running from the barn with a rifle. Owen scrambled to his feet, one gun lost in the snow, the other still clutched in his hand. He looked around wildly, at Wade's house, at the barn, at the mountains, like a trapped animal looking for an escape that didn't exist. His eyes found the upstairs window where Clara stood, frozen. Recognition flashed across his face. He raised his remaining gun. Wade burst through the front door and tackled Owen before he could fire. They went down in a tangle, fighting in the snow. Jack and Ben ran forward. Wade got on top, pinning Owen's arms, while Jack kicked the gun away. "It's over," Wade said through gritted teeth. "Stop fighting." But Owen kept struggling, kept screaming incoherent accusations about Clara and betrayal and everything he'd lost. It took all three men to restrain him, and even then, he fought like something feral. Clara stood at the window, rifle clutched in her shaking hands, and watched the man who was supposed to give her security and safety thrash in the snow, destroyed by his own choices. Finally, Owen exhausted himself. He lay in the snow, gasping, broken. Wade stood slowly, breathing hard. "Ben, ride to town, get the sheriff, tell him we've got Mercer, and we're holding him until he arrives." Ben mounted his horse and rode off at a gallop. Wade looked up at the window where Clara stood. Their eyes met across the distance. He nodded once. "We're okay. You're safe." And Clara felt something inside her finally unclench. It was over. The sheriff arrived 3 hours later with 2 deputies. They took Owen away in chains, still muttering about revenge and injustice. Clara watched from the porch as they rode off, this man she'd crossed a continent to marry, reduced to a prisoner being dragged back to jail for crimes he couldn't accept were his own fault. "You all right?" Wade stood beside her, a bandage on his arm where a piece of broken glass had cut him. "I don't know," Clara said honestly. "I thought I'd feel relieved. I just feel tired." "That's normal. Adrenaline crash." Wade leaned against the porch railing. "It'll take time to process what happened." Clara looked at the broken windows, the bullet holes in the wall. "I brought this here. I brought danger to your home." "You didn't bring anything. Owen Mercer made his own choices." Wade's voice was firm. "You were just the excuse he used to avoid taking responsibility. Still, if you'd never come here, Emma would still be locked in her room. We wouldn't have a library, and I'd still be eating my own cooking." Wade turned to face her fully. "You didn't bring danger, Clara. You brought life to a place that had forgotten what that looked like." Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks. She didn't try to hide them. Wade pulled her into a careful embrace, his arms solid and warm. "You're safe now. We're all safe. And we're going to rebuild those windows and patch those walls and keep moving forward. That's what we do." Clara leaned into him and let herself cry for everything she'd lost, everything she'd survived, everything she'd become. And Wade just held her, patient and steady, until the storm finally passed. The days after Owen's capture felt strange, too quiet, like the world was holding its breath waiting for the next disaster. Clara kept expecting another threat to appear, another crisis to shatter the fragile peace they'd built. But nothing came. The sheriff sent word that Owen was back in custody, this time in a cell that actually had guards who stayed sober. The trial for the guard's murder would happen in the spring, but everyone knew how it would end. Owen Mercer was headed for a noose or life in territorial prison, and either way, he'd never trouble Clara again. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt numb. Wade replaced the broken windows and patched the bullet holes, but the damage lingered in other ways. Clara startled at sudden noises. Emma retreated to her room for 2 days before forcing herself back downstairs. Even Ben and Jack moved differently, more cautious, checking shadows they used to ignore. "Trauma takes time to fade," Wade said one evening as they sat by the fire. "Don't expect yourself to just get over it." "How long did it take you?" Clara asked. "After your father died?" Wade stared into the flames. "I'll let you know when it happens." They fell into silence after that, both understanding that some wounds never fully closed. You just learned to function around them. Christmas arrived without ceremony. They were too isolated for church services, too busy with winter survival for elaborate celebrations. But on Christmas morning, Clara woke to find a package wrapped in brown paper outside her door. Inside was a leather-bound journal with blank pages and a note in Wade's careful handwriting. "For your thoughts, since you spend so much time organizing everyone else's." Clara ran her fingers over the smooth leather and felt something warm spread through her chest. It was the most thoughtful gift anyone had ever given her, not because it was expensive, but because it showed Wade had been paying attention. He'd noticed her making lists, drafting library plans, writing letters for settlers who couldn't write themselves. He'd seen her need to organize chaos into meaning. She went downstairs to find Emma in the kitchen making coffee, a rare sight. "Merry Christmas," Emma said quietly. "Merry Christmas." Clara hesitated, then pulled a small package from her pocket. "I made you something." Emma opened it carefully. Inside was a bookmark Clara had embroidered with wild flowers, the same ones that had been dried in the jar in the sewing room when Clara first arrived. Emma's eyes filled with tears. This is beautiful. I noticed you've been reading the books I leave outside your door. Thought you might need a bookmark. I have been reading them. Emma traced the embroidered flowers with one finger. They help. When everything feels too big and scary, I can disappear into someone else's story for a while. That's why I became a librarian. Clara poured herself coffee. Books saved me when nothing else could. Seemed only fair to help them save other people too. Emma looked at her directly. You're the first person who's understood that. Everyone else thinks reading is just frivolous, something to do when real work is finished. Reading is real work. It's how we learn we're not alone. They stood together in the quiet kitchen, two broken women who'd found an unexpected understanding, and Clara realized that this small moment of connection, was worth more than all the elaborate Christmases she'd endured in Briar Glen, surrounded by people who never really saw her. Wade came in from the barn, stomping snow off his boots. He saw them together and smiled, that rare expression that transformed his weathered face. Morning. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, Clara said. Thank you for the journal. It's perfect. Figured you could use it. Wade poured coffee and leaned against the counter. I've been thinking about the library. Spring's coming eventually, and when it does, that little room at the Mercantile's going to be too small. Clara felt her heart skip. What do you mean? I mean, you've got 40 families using it regularly now. Harrison told me you've logged over 300 book loans since you opened. That's not a hobby anymore, Clara. That's a real community resource. Wade took a sip of coffee. I'm thinking we build a proper library building in town. Nothing fancy, but something with space for books and tables where folks can sit and read or get help with writing. Wade, that would cost... I know what it would cost. I'm willing to invest in it. He met her eyes. This territory is growing fast. In 5 years, Willow Ridge could be a real town with schools and newspapers and all the things that make civilization work. But that only happens if we lay the foundation now. A library's part of that foundation. Emma spoke up quietly. I could help. With the building, I mean. I used to help Father with carpentry before. She trailed off, then forced herself to continue. Before Thomas. I was good at it. Wade looked at his sister with an expression Clara couldn't quite read, pride mixed with something that looked like grief. You sure? I need to start doing things again. Real things, not just existing. Emma's voice was shaky but determined. If I'm going to get better, I have to stop hiding. Clara reached out and squeezed Emma's hand. I'd love your help. They spent Christmas Day planning, sketching rough designs on scraps of paper, estimating materials, discussing where in town the building should go. It felt good to dream about the future instead of just surviving the present. Even Emma contributed ideas, her eyes brightening as she remembered the skills her father had taught her. That night after dinner, Wade walked Clara out to the porch. The sky was clear and impossibly full of stars, the kind of display you never saw back east, where buildings and smoke obscured everything. It's beautiful, Clara said, her breath fogging in the cold air. One of the few benefits of living in the middle of nowhere. Wade leaned against the railing. Clara, I need to tell you something. The seriousness in his voice made her nervous. What? The library building, that's real. I meant every word, but there's another reason I suggested it. He turned to face her. I don't want you to feel trapped here. You came to Montana expecting one kind of life and ended up with something completely different. Once the library's built, once you've got that established, you'll have options. You could run it as a business, make real money, build independence. You could even leave if you wanted to. Go somewhere bigger, somewhere with more opportunities. Clara stared at him. You're giving me an escape route. I'm giving you choices. There's a difference. Wade's voice was gentle. You've spent your whole life being told what you couldn't do, where you didn't belong. I don't want this ranch to become another cage. Even a comfortable cage is still a cage. Clara felt emotions twist in her chest, gratitude and confusion, and something else she wasn't ready to name. What if I don't want to leave? Then you stay. But it'll be because you chose to, not because you had nowhere else to go. And what do you want? Wade was quiet for a long moment. I want you to be happy, whatever that looks like. It wasn't a declaration of love or devotion. It was something better, respect for her autonomy, recognition of her right to choose her own path. Claire had spent months watching Wade, learning how he moved through the world. He didn't make grand gestures or speak in flowery language. He showed care through actions, through creating space for people to become who they needed to be. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing me as a whole person, not just someone to be rescued or fixed. You never needed rescuing, you just needed room to grow." Wade straightened. "Come on, it's too cold to stay out here. Let's get inside." They went back into the warm house, and Clara felt something settle in her chest. Whatever the future held, she'd face it with choices, not just circumstances. That was a gift more valuable than any wrapped package. January came in brutal and unforgiving. The temperatures dropped so low that water froze solid in minutes, metal burned bare skin on contact, and breathing the air felt like inhaling knives. The ranch work became a battle against nature's cruelty, breaking ice on water troughs multiple times a day, ensuring animals had shelter and feed, keeping fires burning constantly. Wade pushed himself relentlessly, barely sleeping, checking on sheep even in the worst weather. Clara watched him wear himself down and knew she couldn't stop him. This was how he showed love, through exhausting, endless vigilance. But the work took its toll. Ben came down with a fever that lasted a week. Jack threw out his back hauling feed and could barely move for 3 days. Wade developed a cough that wouldn't quit, though he refused to slow down. And Clara herself felt the exhaustion seeping into her bones, making every task feel twice as heavy. It was Emma who surprised them all. She'd been coming downstairs regularly, helping with cooking and cleaning, even venturing outside briefly to check on the chickens. But one morning when Wade was too sick to get out of bed and Jack was still recovering, Emma pulled on her father's old work coat and walked out to the barn. Clara found her an hour later, feeding the horses with competent, practiced movements. "Emma?" Emma didn't stop working. "Someone had to do it. Wade can't, Jack can't. Ben's still weak. That leaves us." "You haven't been outside alone in 3 years." "I know." Emma's voice shook slightly. "I'm terrified. But the horses need feeding, and being terrified is better than being useless." Clara felt pride swell in her chest. "Need help?" "Yes." They worked together through the morning, hauling hay and breaking ice and doing all the brutal tasks that kept a ranch functioning. Emma's hands shook, and she startled at every noise, but she didn't quit. When they finally came back inside, both of them were exhausted and freezing, but Emma's eyes held something Clara hadn't seen before: satisfaction. "I did it," Emma said quietly. "I went outside, I did the work. I didn't fall apart. You did more than that. You kept this place running." Clara handed her hot coffee. "Your father would be proud." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I wish he could see this. See me trying to be strong again. He sees it. Wherever he is, he sees it." That night, Wade came downstairs briefly, his fever broken but still weak. He found Emma in the kitchen making stew and stopped in the doorway, staring like he'd seen a miracle. "Em?" His voice was hoarse from coughing. Emma turned, wooden spoon in hand. "You should be in bed." "What are you doing?" "Making dinner. Someone has to." She went back to stirring. "Clara and I handled the animals this morning. Jack's back is better, so he'll help tomorrow, but we managed fine on our own." Wade crossed the kitchen and pulled his sister into a fierce hug. Emma stiffened for a moment, then melted into it, both of them holding on like they might disappear if they let go. "I'm proud of you," Wade said roughly. "So damn proud. I'm not better yet. I'm still scared of everything." "Being scared doesn't make you weak. Working anyway makes you strong." He pulled back to look at her. "You did good, Em. Real good." Emma's face crumpled and she cried while Wade held her, 3 years of pain and fear finally finding release. Clara busied herself with setting the table, giving them privacy, but she felt her own tears threatening. This family had been broken in so many ways, but they were learning to heal, not magically, not completely, but in small, real moments of courage and connection. February brought a brief warming spell that tricked everyone into thinking winter might finally release its grip. The snow started melting, revealing brown grass and mud underneath. Wade used the reprieve to start gathering materials for the library building, ordering lumber from the mill, arranging for tools, drafting more detailed plans with Emma's help. Clara threw herself back into library work, making the trip to town 3 times a week now that the roads were passable. The little room at the Mercantile was bursting at the seams. She'd organized books into every available space, but people kept donating more. A family moving back east gave her 30 volumes. A traveling merchant left a crate of penny dreadfuls. Even the local saloon keeper donated books, though Clara had to carefully sort through them to remove the truly inappropriate ones before putting them on the shelves. One afternoon, she was reorganizing the children's section when a woman she didn't recognize walked in. She was well-dressed by frontier standards, her coat clean and her boots expensive. She looked around the crowded room with an expression Clara couldn't quite read. "Can I help you?" Clara asked. The woman turned. "You're Clara Whitmore? The librarian?" "Yes, I'm Margaret Donnelly. My husband owns the Donnelly Ranch about 15 miles south." She moved closer, studying Clara intently. "I heard about what you're doing here. It's impressive." "Thank you. I also heard about what happened with Owen Mercer." Margaret's voice softened. "That must have been terrifying." Clara felt her shoulders tense. "It's over now." "Is it? Or are you still living at Wade Callahan's ranch, dependent on his charity, building a library on his money?" Margaret's tone wasn't cruel, just direct. "I'm not judging, mind you. I'm just curious about your long-term plan." Clara felt defensive heat rise in her chest. "Wade and I have an arrangement. I work for him. He provides housing and funds the library. It's a business relationship. And when spring comes, when Owen's trial happens, and everyone in the territory is reminded that you're the abandoned mail-order bride who caused a scandal, what happens to this library then?" Margaret gestured at the crowded shelves. "Public opinion is fickle, Miss Whitmore. Right now, people think you're admirable. But that can change fast, especially for women in vulnerable positions." "What exactly are you saying?" Margaret sat down on one of the stools. "I'm saying you need more than Wade Callahan's protection. You need legitimacy, legal standing, your own resources." She pulled an envelope from her coat. "That's why I'm offering you this." Clara took the envelope carefully. Inside was a bank draft for $300, more money than she'd seen in her entire life. "What is this for?" "Investment. In the library. And in you." Margaret leaned forward. "My husband and I came out here 20 years ago with nothing. We built our ranch through hard work and smart decisions, but we also benefited from people who invested in us when we needed it most. Now we want to pay that forward." She nodded toward the envelope. "Use that money however you need to. Build the library as an independent institution, not Wade's charity project. Establish yourself as the owner and operator, not just an employee. Give yourself financial independence so you're never again at the mercy of men who make promises they can't keep." Clara stared at the bank draft, her mind reeling. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" "Because I was you once. Scared, stranded, dependent on men I barely knew to survive. I got lucky. My husband turned out to be honorable. But I know what it's like to have no power, no choices, no safety net." Margaret stood. "Consider this a business investment. I believe you'll make the library successful, which means it'll appreciate in value. When you're established and profitable, you can pay me back with interest. Until then, you've got capital to work with." "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it." Margaret moved toward the door. "But think fast. Spring's coming, and with it opportunities that won't wait." She left before Clara could respond. Clara sat alone among the books, holding $300 and trying to process what had just happened. Margaret was right about everything. Clara was still dependent, still vulnerable, still one disaster away from losing everything. The library existed because Wade funded it. Her security existed because Wade provided housing. If Wade changed his mind or something happened to him, Clara would be back where she started. But with $300 and legal ownership of the library, she could build real independence. She could establish herself as someone with standing in the community, not just Wade's employee or the tragic mail-order bride everyone pitied. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. That night, Clara told Wade about Margaret's offer. They sat at the kitchen table while Emma washed dishes, pretending not to listen. Wade was quiet for a long time after Clara finished explaining. Finally, he said, "You should take it." "Just like that?" "Just like that." Wade met her eyes. "I told you at Christmas. I want you to have choices. This is a choice. Take the money establish the library as your own, build something that can't be taken away from you. But you were going to fund the new building. I still will. Consider it a donation to a worthy community institution. Wade's mouth quirked. Besides, if you own it, you can name it whatever you want. I was going to call it the Callahan Library. You can do better. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. You're really okay with this? With me becoming independent? I'm more than okay with it. I'm relieved. Wade reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Clara, you're one of the strongest people I've ever met, but you've spent your whole life letting other people define your worth. It's time you did that for yourself. Emma spoke up from the sink. Take the money, Clara. Build something that's yours. We'll still be here when you need us. Clara looked between them. This strange, broken family that had taken her in and given her space to become who she was supposed to be. They weren't trying to hold her back or keep her dependent. They were pushing her forward, even if it meant losing her. Okay, she said quietly. I'll do it. The next morning, Clara went back to town and accepted Margaret's offer. They drew up a simple contract. Clara would repay the $300 with 10% interest over 5 years, and in exchange, Clara owned the library outright. Margaret also agreed to serve on a library board with 2 other prominent ranchers' wives, giving the institution credibility and protection from accusations of impropriety. The news spread through the settlement fast. Some people approved, calling Clara smart and ambitious. Others were scandalized that a single woman would run a business independently. A few people stopped using the library entirely, declaring it improper for an unmarried woman to have such freedom. But most people didn't care about propriety. They cared about having access to books and someone who could help them read, write, and organize their chaotic frontier lives. By the end of February, Clara had enough support to move forward with construction. Wade donated the land, a corner lot on the main street, perfectly positioned. Emma drew up building plans with input from Clara and the board members. Local ranchers donated materials and labor, seeing the library as an investment in the settlement's future. They broke ground on March 1st, when the snow had finally melted enough to work the earth. Clara stood at the edge of the lot with a shovel in her hands, Wade and Emma beside her, and turned the first shovelful of Montana dirt that would become the foundation of something entirely hers. The trial started 3 weeks later. Clara hadn't planned to attend, but the judge sent word that her testimony might be required. She rode to the territorial courthouse with Wade, her stomach churning with dread. The courthouse was packed, families of the dead miners, ranchers curious about the proceedings, reporters from newspapers as far away as Denver. Clara sat in the back and tried to disappear, but she could feel eyes on her. The abandoned mail-order bride, the woman at the center of Owen Mercer's downfall. When Owen was led in wearing chains, Clara barely recognized him. He'd lost weight, his face was gaunt and gray, his eyes hollow. He didn't look like the man who'd picked her up from the train station. He looked like something already dead, just waiting for the formality of burial. The trial lasted 3 days. Prosecutors presented evidence of Owen's negligence, his fraudulent investment promises, his role in the mine collapse. They brought families to testify about husbands and fathers and sons crushed under rocks because Owen and his partners had cut corners to save money. Owen's lawyer tried to argue that Owen had been misled, that he was a victim himself, that he'd truly believed the mine was safe. But the evidence was overwhelming, and when they brought testimony about the guard Owen had killed during his escape, a young man with a wife and baby daughter, even Owen's lawyer seemed to give up. Clara was called to testify on the 3rd day. She walked to the stand on shaking legs, aware of every eye in the courtroom following her. The prosecutor was gentle. "Miss Whitmore, please describe your relationship with the defendant." I answered his mail-order bride advertisement. We exchanged letters. He sent money for a train ticket. I came to Montana expecting to marry him. Clara kept her voice steady. When I arrived, he informed me his ranch was failing and he'd invested in the Copperhead mine hoping to recover his losses. 3 days later, he was arrested. Did Mr. Mercer ever express regret for misleading you? No, he blamed me for his arrest. He said if I hadn't come, everything would have worked out. Did you have any involvement in Mr. Mercer's business decisions? None. I knew nothing about his investments until after his arrest. The prosecutor nodded. Thank you, Miss Whitmore. Owen's lawyer stood for cross-examination. Miss Whitmore, Isn't it true that you're currently living with Wade Callahan, a sheep rancher? Clara felt heat rise in her face. I work for Mr. Callahan. I have my own room and I'm paid for my labor. But you do live under his roof, correct? An unmarried woman living with an unmarried man? Objection, the prosecutor said sharply. Miss Whitmore's living arrangements are irrelevant to Mr. Mercer's crimes. Sustained, the judge said. Move on, counselor. The lawyer tried a few more angles, attempting to paint Clara as somehow responsible for Owen's choices, but the prosecutor shut him down each time. Finally, Clara was dismissed, and she returned to her seat, her hands trembling. Owen stared at her as she passed. His expression held no recognition, no remorse, just blank emptiness. Whatever had been human in him had been consumed by bitterness and self-pity. The verdict came the next morning. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing would be in 2 weeks, but everyone knew what it would be. Murder during escape from lawful custody carried a mandatory death sentence. Clara felt no satisfaction, just a deep, aching sadness for all the wasted potential and destroyed lives, the miners who died, Owen who'd destroyed himself through greed and lies, and the version of herself she'd been when she stepped off that train expecting security and finding nothing but chaos. They rode home in silence. Wade didn't try to comfort her or tell her it was over. He just drove the wagon and let her process in her own time. When they reached the ranch, Emma was waiting on the porch. She'd stayed behind, still not ready to face crowds, but her eyes were anxious. How did it go? She asked. Guilty, Wade said simply. Emma nodded and held out her hand to Clara. Come inside. I made stew. Clara took her hand and let herself be led into the warm house, into the smell of cooking food and burning wood and all the things that meant safety. Emma sat her down at the table, poured coffee, and then sat beside her without speaking. They stayed like that for a long time, 3 people who'd survived different kinds of destruction, holding space for each other's pain, building something like family from the wreckage of their separate tragedies. Spring arrived slowly, reluctantly, like it wasn't sure Montana deserved another season of warmth. The snow melted in patches, revealing dead grass and mud and all the debris winter had hidden. The sheep grew restless, ready for higher pastures, and the library building rose from its foundation like something being born, slow, messy, but undeniably real. Clara spent her days split between the construction site and the temporary library at the Mercantile. She'd hired 2 local men to help with the building work, and Emma showed up almost every day with tools and her father's carpentry knowledge, directing the workers with surprising authority. Wade donated labor whenever ranch work allowed, framing walls and installing windows with the same patient competence he brought to everything. The building took shape through April and into May. 4 walls, a peaked roof, windows that faced east to catch morning light. Inside, Emma designed built-in shelves that would maximize space while Clara planned the layout. A reading area by the windows, a desk for checkout and reference help, a small back room for storage and private consultations. Nothing fancy, but everything functional. The whole settlement watched the progress. Some people stopped by to help. Others came to criticize or gossip. A few townswomen made pointed comments about Clara's independence, suggesting that a proper woman wouldn't be so bold. Clara learned to smile politely and ignore them. She'd spent too many years caring what people thought. She was done with that. On a warm afternoon in mid-May, Clara was painting the interior walls when Margaret Donnelly arrived with another woman Clara didn't recognize. Clara, this is Sarah Chen, Margaret said. She runs a newspaper in Helena. I thought you two should meet. Sarah was Chinese, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and ink-stained fingers. She looked around the unfinished library with obvious interest. Margaret tells me you're building the territory's first independent lending library. That's quite an accomplishment. It's not finished yet, Clara said cautiously, but it will be. And when it is, I'd like to write about it. Sarah pulled out a notebook. The story of a mail-order bride who lost everything and built it back better. That's the kind of story people need to hear, especially women who think they're trapped by their circumstances. Clara felt uncomfortable. I'm not looking for publicity. Maybe not. But the library needs it. You're trying to establish legitimacy in a territory that doesn't trust women with power. A newspaper article gives you credibility. It tells people this isn't some whim. It's a serious institution run by a serious person. Margaret nodded. She's right. Public perception matters, whether you like it or not. Clara looked at Sarah Chen, this woman who'd clearly built her own path in a world that didn't welcome Chinese immigrants or female newspaper editors. What would you want from me? Your story, honestly told. Where you came from, what happened with Owen Mercer, how you ended up here, what you're building. Sarah's voice was firm but kind. I won't sensationalize it. I won't make you into some fairy tale heroine. I'll just tell the truth about a woman who refused to disappear when the world tried to make her. Clara thought about all the years she'd spent being invisible, about Mrs. Frost and the library board deciding she wasn't enough, about Owen bringing her west on lies, about standing in an empty yard watching strangers auction off her future. Maybe it was time to stop hiding from her own story. All right, Clara said, but I get to read it before you print it, and if I don't like what you wrote, you don't publish. Sarah smiled. Deal. They sat outside on sawhorses while the construction crew worked around them, and Clara told her story. Not the sanitized version she'd been performing for polite society, but the real one. The loneliness, the desperation, the lies, the fear. Sarah wrote it all down in efficient shorthand, asking clarifying questions but never pushing. When Clara got to the part about Owen's attack on the ranch, Sarah stopped writing and looked up. That must have been terrifying. It was. But it was also clarifying. Clara chose her words carefully. I'd spent my whole life being afraid. Afraid of being noticed, afraid of being rejected, afraid of taking up space. Owen showing up with guns and rage made me realize I'd rather die fighting for something real than keep living small and safe and invisible. Sarah's pen moved across the page. And Wade Callahan. What's his role in all this? Clara felt heat rise in her face. He gave me work when I needed it. He funded the library initially. He's been a good friend. Just a friend? I don't know what else to call it yet. Clara surprised herself with the honesty. We're both damaged people trying to survive. We've built something together, him and me and his sister Emma. Something that looks like family even if it's not traditional. I don't know what it becomes in the future, but right now it's enough. Sarah wrote that down too, her expression thoughtful. You're braver than you think, Miss Whitmore. I'm not brave. I'm just tired of being afraid. That's what bravery is, doing the thing even though you're terrified. Sarah closed her notebook. Thank you for your honesty. I'll have a draft for you to review in 2 weeks. After Sarah left, Clara sat alone on the sawhorses and watched the sun drop toward the mountains. The library building cast a long shadow across the dirt street, solid, real, hers. In a few weeks, it would open officially. She'd already ordered more books, organized a lending system, recruited volunteers to help with operations. The library board had approved everything. She'd done this, not through luck or charity or being rescued, but through her own work and choices. Emma found her there as darkness fell. You okay? I think so. Just processing. Emma sat down beside her. That reporter, what you told her about being tired of being afraid, that hit hard. Yeah, I've been afraid for 3 years. Afraid of people, afraid of the world, afraid of my own memories. Emma's voice was quiet but steady. But watching you build this, watching you fight for something even when you were terrified, it made me realize I don't want to be afraid anymore either. I want to live again. Clara reached over and took Emma's hand. You are living. You're out here working, helping, being part of the world. That's living. It's a start. Emma squeezed her hand. But I want more. I want to ride into town without panic. I want to talk to people without hiding. I want to stop letting Thomas Garrett own my life just because he tried to destroy it. That's not going to happen overnight. I know, but I'm ready to start trying. Emma looked at Clara directly. Will you help me? Not by fixing me or pushing me, just by being there while I figure it out? Of course, Clara said. We'll figure it out together. They sat in comfortable silence as stars appeared overhead. 2 women who'd both been broken finding strength in shared determination. The library opened on June 1st. Clara had planned a simple opening. Unlock the doors, shelve the books, help anyone who needed it. But the settlement had other ideas. When she arrived that morning, the street was full of people. Families, ranchers, merchants, children running wild with excitement. Someone had strung bunting across the front of the building. Harrison from the Mercantile had donated a banner that read, Willow Ridge Community Library, Clara Whitmore, proprietor. Clara stood frozen, overwhelmed. Margaret appeared at her elbow. Surprise! What is all this? Celebration. You built something worth celebrating. Margaret gestured at the crowd. These people understand what you've done here. You gave them something they didn't even know they needed. A place that says they matter. Their stories matter. Their need to learn and grow matters. That's worth honoring. Wade and Emma pushed through the crowd. Wade was dressed in his good shirt. Emma in a dress Clara had never seen her wear. They both looked nervous and proud. Ready? Wade asked. Clara looked at the library. Her library, standing solid in the morning sun. She thought about the frightened woman who'd stepped off the train 8 months ago expecting security from a lying rancher. She thought about standing in an empty yard with $17 and no future. She thought about every moment of doubt and fear and exhaustion that had brought her to this exact place. Yes, she said, I'm ready. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, the crowd following. The interior smelled of fresh paint and new wood and books. Hundreds of books lining the shelves Emma had built, organized by the system Clara had designed. Sunlight streamed through the east windows, illuminating reading tables and comfortable chairs donated by ranching families. For the next hour, Clara gave tours and explained the lending system and helped people find books. Children ran between shelves with wonder. Old ranchers who'd never touched a book in their lives asked shy questions about learning to read. Young mothers wanted help writing letters home. A sheep herder from the high country needed help documenting a land claim. Clara helped them all, patient and capable, no longer the quiet girl hiding behind silence. This was her space, her work, her purpose. And she was good at it. By afternoon, most of the crowd had dispersed, taking borrowed books with them. Clara sat at her new desk, updating the lending ledger, when Wade appeared. Quite a day, he said. Quite a day? Clara agreed. She looked up at him. Thank you for everything. I know I keep saying that, but I mean it. You built this yourself. Wade leaned against the desk. I just got out of the way. You did more than that. You saw me when I was invisible. You gave me space to become who I was supposed to be. You never tried to fix me or change me or make me into something convenient. Clara felt emotions tighten her throat. That's a rare gift, Wade. Being seen exactly as you are. Wade was quiet for a moment. Can I tell you something? Of course. When you first showed up at the ranch, I thought I was doing you a favor, helping someone in trouble because it was the right thing to do. He ran his hand through his hair, looking uncomfortable. But somewhere along the way, I realized you were doing me the favor. You brought life back to a place that had been slowly dying. You helped Emma in ways I never could. You made me remember that surviving isn't the same as living. Claire's heart beat faster. What are you saying? I'm saying I care about you more than I intended to, more than is probably smart. Wade met her eyes directly. I know you've got independence now. You've got this library and your own money and choices. I'm not asking you to give that up, but I'm asking if maybe there's room in your life for something more than just survival, for something like partnership. Not because you need it, but because you want it. Clara stared at him, processing what he was offering. Not rescue, not security, not promises he might not keep, just honest partnership between equals. I care about you too, she said slowly, but I'm scared, Wade. I came out here expecting one thing and got something completely different. I don't trust my own judgment anymore. Then don't trust your judgment. Trust what you've seen. You've lived at my ranch for 8 months. You've watched how I treat Emma, how I run my operation, how I keep my word or admit when I can't. You know who I am, not who I say I am, but who I actually am. Wade's voice was gentle. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm just asking if you're willing to see where this goes. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people figuring it out together. Clara thought about everything she'd learned since leaving Vermont, about how strength wasn't loudness or confidence, but the quiet determination to keep moving forward even when you were terrified. About how family wasn't just blood, but the people who saw you and chose to stay anyway. About how love wasn't grand gestures, but the small daily choices to show up and be present and make space for each other's humanity. Yes, she said quietly, I'm willing to see where this goes. Wade smiled, that rare transforming smile that made him look younger. Good, that's good. He started to leave, then turned back. Clara? For what it's worth, I think you made exactly the right choice getting on that train. Not because it led you to me, but because it led you to yourself. That took more courage than most people ever manage. After he left, Clara sat alone in her library and let herself feel everything. The fear, the hope, the uncertainty, the quiet joy. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she was facing it as a whole person, with choices and agency and the knowledge that she could survive whatever came. That was worth more than any security she'd ever been promised. Summer arrived in full force, bringing long days and hard work. The ranch demanded constant attention. Sheep to move to high pastures, hay to cut and store, fences to repair. Clara split her time between the library and the ranch, learning to navigate both worlds. She rode out with Wade sometimes to check on the sheep, getting stronger and more confident on horseback. She helped Emma with carpentry projects around the ranch, the two of them working in companionable silence punctuated by occasional laughter. The library thrived. Clara logged over 1,000 book loans by mid-July. She'd started teaching reading classes twice a week, working with adults who'd never had the chance to learn. She helped dozens of people write letters, file land claims, keep basic business records. The library became the center of community life, not just for books, but for information, organization, and connection. Sarah Chen's article was published in late July. Clara read it 3 times, checking for sensationalism or exaggeration, but found only honest reporting. Sarah had captured Clara's story without making her into either a victim or a hero, just a real woman who'd faced impossible situations and found ways through them. The article brought visitors from other settlements, people wanting to see this mail-order bride who'd built a library. Some came with judgment. Others came with genuine curiosity. Clara learned to handle both with grace, knowing her work spoke louder than any gossip. In August, Margaret and the library board approached Clara with a proposal. Several other frontier settlements wanted to establish their own libraries and were asking for Clara's help. Would she be willing to travel and consult, sharing what she'd learned? "You've created a model that works," Margaret said. "Small towns all over the territory are watching what you've done here. They want to replicate it." Clara felt pride and terror in equal measure. "I don't know if I'm qualified to tell other people how to do this." "You're more qualified than anyone else. You've done it. You know what works and what doesn't." Margaret leaned forward. "Clara, you have a chance to build something bigger than just this one library. You could help establish a network of community libraries across Montana Territory. That's real impact." Clara thought about it for 3 days before giving her answer. She would do it, but on her terms. Short consulting trips that didn't interfere with running her own library, and only to settlements that actually wanted her help, rather than just wanting to gawk at the scandalous mail-order bride. The first trip was to a mining town 50 miles north. Clara rode there with Wade, who had business with ranchers in the area. She spent 2 days meeting with town leaders, surveying potential locations, explaining catalog systems and lending procedures. The town council was skeptical at first. Why would miners need books? But Clara won them over by focusing on practical benefits, documentation of claims, letters home to families, education for children who had no school. By the time she left, they'd committed to building their own library. On the ride home, Wade said, "You're good at this, really good." "At what?" "Convincing people that things they think are luxuries are actually necessities. You make people see possibilities they didn't know existed." He glanced at her. "That's a rare skill." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. "I just tell them the truth. Books aren't decoration. They're survival tools for building civilization. See? That's exactly what I mean." Wade's tone was affectionate. "You take something people think is frivolous and show them it's essential. That's what you did with yourself, too. You took a woman everyone dismissed as too quiet and proved she was essential instead." Clara reached over and took his hand. They rode like that for a while, fingers intertwined, comfortable in their silence. The trial verdict came in September. Owen Mercer was sentenced to hang for the murder of the prison guard. The mine collapse charges carried long prison terms, but those didn't matter anymore. Owen would be dead by November. Clara received the news at the library. She sat at her desk and stared at the letter, trying to feel something. Relief? Satisfaction? But mostly she just felt tired. Owen's death wouldn't bring back the dead miners or the years she'd lost to invisibility. It wouldn't undo the lies or the fear. It would just end a chapter that had already closed. That night at the ranch, she told Wade and Emma about the verdict. They received it quietly, neither celebrating nor mourning. "How do you feel?" Emma asked. "Empty," Clara admitted. "He destroyed so many lives, including his own. I feel like I should feel something stronger, but I just feel nothing." "That's normal," Wade said. "He's not worth your energy anymore. You've moved past him." "Have I, though? Every time someone new visits the library, I wonder if they're coming to help or to judge. Every time someone brings up Owen's name, I tense up, waiting for them to blame me." Clara rubbed her temples. "I don't know if I'll ever fully escape being the mail-order bride from the scandal." Emma spoke up quietly. "You know what I realized? We don't escape our pasts. We just build futures big enough that the past becomes a smaller part of the story." She looked at Clara. "A year ago, I was just the girl Thomas Garrett beat. That was my entire identity. But now I'm also the woman who helps build things, who works a ranch, who's learning to not be afraid. The old story is still there, but it's not the only story anymore." Clara felt something shift in her understanding. Emma was right. The story of Owen Mercer and the failed marriage would always be part of Clara's history, but it was just one chapter in a much longer story, a story that now included building a library, creating community, finding family, learning strength. The question wasn't how to escape the past, it was how to build a future so full and real that the past couldn't define it anymore. "Thank you," Clara said to Emma. "I needed to hear that." Emma smiled, a real smile, the first Clara had seen from her that reached all the way to her eyes. "We're both learning. That's what matters." October brought the first snow and the anniversary of Clara's arrival. 1 year since she'd stepped off the train in Willow Ridge, expecting security and finding nothing but lies and abandonment. 1 year since Wade had offered her work. 1 year since she'd started building a life from ruins. The library now held over 800 volumes and served 200 active borrowers. Clara had trained 3 volunteers to help with operations so she could take consulting trips. She'd helped establish 2 more community libraries and had invitations to consult for 4 others. The library board had voted to make her position permanent with a salary that provided real independence. On the exact anniversary, Wade asked Clara to go riding with him. They took horses up into the high country where the aspen trees had turned gold and the air was crisp with approaching winter. They stopped at a ridge overlooking the valley where Wade's ranch sat small and solid in the distance. "I wanted to show you something," Wade said. He pulled out a folded paper and handed it to her. Clara opened it. It was a deed for 20 acres of land adjacent to the town, designated for library expansion and community use. The deed was in her name. "Wade, I can't accept this." "You're not accepting it as a gift. You're accepting it as an investment in the community." Wade dismounted and came to stand beside her horse. "The library's outgrowing its current building. In 5 years, you'll need more space. This gives you room to expand. It also establishes you as a permanent landowner, which gives you legal standing and political power." Clara stared at the deed, overwhelmed. "This is too much." "It's exactly enough. Clara, you've spent a year proving yourself over and over to a community that should have trusted you from the beginning. You're done proving. Now you're building." Wade's voice was firm. "I want to be part of that building, not as your savior or protector, but as your partner, if you'll have me." Clara climbed down from her horse. They stood facing each other on the ridge, the valley spread out below them, the mountains rising above. "I'm scared," Clara said honestly. "I'm scared of trusting again. I'm scared of being wrong about you the way I was wrong about Owen. I'm scared of losing everything I've built if this doesn't work out. Those are all reasonable fears." Wade didn't try to dismiss them. "I'm scared too. I'm scared of failing you. I'm scared of not being enough. I'm scared of losing you just when I've found you." He took her hands. "But I think the fear is part of it. We've both been hurt. We both know how badly things can go wrong. We're choosing each other anyway, eyes open, knowing the risks." Clara looked at this man who'd seen her when she was invisible, who'd given her space instead of trying to fix her, who'd pushed her toward independence instead of dependence. She thought about the last year, the work, the fear, the growth, the slow building of trust. She thought about the future she could build with him versus the future she could build alone. Both futures looked possible, both looked good, in different ways. But one future included partnership, shared load, someone to face the storms with, and Clara realized she was tired of facing everything alone. "Okay," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." Wade's expression transformed with relief and joy. He pulled her close and kissed her, gentle and careful and full of promise. When they pulled apart, he was grinning. I don't have a ring. Didn't want to presume. I don't need a ring. Clara laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. I need a partner who respects me. I need someone who will let me be strong without feeling threatened. I need someone who understands that I'm damaged and imperfect and still choosing to love me anyway. You have all of that, Wade said seriously, and you'll keep having it every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. They rode back down to the ranch as the sun set, and Clara felt something settle in her chest. This wasn't a fairy tale ending where everything became perfect. There would still be hard winters and difficult people and moments of doubt, but she would face them as a whole person with choices and agency and someone beside her who saw her value. That was worth more than any promise of security Owen had ever made. They married in December, a small ceremony at the ranch with Emma, Ben, Jack, and Margaret as witnesses. No big celebration, no fancy dress, just simple vows spoken in front of people who mattered. Clara wore her mother's old locket and a practical dress she could work in. Wade wore his good shirt and looked at her like she was the most remarkable thing he'd ever seen. Emma cried during the ceremony, happy tears for the first time in years. Afterward, she pulled Clara aside. Thank you, Emma said quietly. For what? For showing me that broken doesn't mean finished, that you can survive terrible things and still build something beautiful. Emma's voice was steady. I'm going to try harder, to live more, to stop letting fear run my life. You're already doing that, Clara said. You're out here. You're working. You're part of the world again. That's everything. It's a start. Emma smiled. I want more, though. I want what you have, purpose and partnership and the courage to keep choosing life even when it's scary. You'll get there. Give yourself time. They rejoined the small gathering, and Clara looked around at her unlikely family. Wade, solid and steady. Emma, slowly healing. Ben and Jack, loyal friends who'd become like brothers. Margaret, who'd invested in her when no one else would. This wasn't the life she'd imagined on that train from Vermont. It was something stranger and harder and more real. It was hers. Winter settled in deep and harsh, but the ranch was prepared. They had food stored, animals secure, firewood stacked. The library closed for the worst weeks, but Clara used the time to read and plan. She and Wade spent long evenings by the fire, talking about the future, expanding the library, maybe starting a small school, eventually building a house on the land Wade had deeded to her. Emma joined them most nights now, no longer hiding upstairs. She'd started talking about maybe visiting other ranches, maybe even going into town for gatherings. Small steps, but real ones. On a particularly cold night in February, Clara sat writing in the journal Wade had given her the previous Christmas. She'd filled half of it already with thoughts, plans, observations about the strange life she'd built. She wrote, "A year and a half ago, I got on a train believing I was too quiet, too forgettable, too broken to matter. I believed the lies people told me about my worth. I let myself become invisible because I thought that was what I deserved. But somewhere between the train platform in Vermont and this mountain ranch in Montana, I learned something crucial. Strength doesn't come from being loud or confident or fearless. It comes from showing up anyway, even when you're terrified. From doing the work even when no one's watching. From building something real even when everyone says you'll fail. I learned that being broken doesn't make you useless. It makes you human. That being quiet doesn't make you weak. It makes you thoughtful. That needing help doesn't make you dependent. It makes you part of a community. Most importantly, I learned that you can survive terrible things, betrayal, abandonment, violence, fear, and come out the other side not just intact, but stronger. Not because you're special or chosen or blessed, but because you refuse to let circumstances define your worth. The frontier is brutal. It kills people who aren't prepared, but it also reveals who you really are when all the pretense and social expectations are stripped away. And it turns out I'm not the fragile, invisible girl Briar Glen dismissed. I'm someone who builds libraries and survives blizzards and stands her ground when threatened. I'm someone who deserves respect and partnership and a place in the world. That's what I want other women to know, especially women who feel invisible or trapped or convinced they don't matter. You are stronger than you think. Your quiet voice is worth hearing. Your need for independence is valid. Your scars don't disqualify you from happiness. They prove you're a survivor. The world will tell you to be smaller, quieter, more convenient. Don't listen. Build your life on your own terms. Choose people who see your value instead of your flaws. And when you face storms, and you will face storms, remember that survival isn't about being unbreakable. It's about knowing how to rebuild. Clara closed the journal and looked around the warm room. Wade was reading by lamplight, his reading glasses slipping down his nose. Emma was mending a shirt, her hands steady and sure. Outside, snow fell heavy and silent, burying the world in white. This was her life now. Not perfect, not easy, but wholly, completely hers. And that made all the difference. Spring came again, as it always did, bringing new life and new possibilities. The library reopened to a flood of visitors. Clara took on an apprentice, a young woman from a neighboring ranch who wanted to learn library work. Emma started teaching basic carpentry to settlement children, finding purpose in passing on her father's skills. Wade's ranch thrived, the sheep multiplying, the land producing. He and Clara talked about eventually buying more acreage, expanding their operation, maybe bringing in partners. But mostly they just lived, working hard, surviving storms, building community, choosing each other every day through the small and large challenges of frontier life. On a warm day in May, Clara stood in her library watching children pick through the shelves while their mothers wrote letters at the reading tables. An old rancher was learning to read in the corner, slowly sounding out words with one of her volunteers. A young couple was researching land laws, planning their future. This was what she'd built. Not just a building full of books, but a space where people could learn and grow and transform, where quiet voices were heard and small dreams were respected, where being broken didn't disqualify you from mattering. Emma appeared in the doorway, dusty from carpentry work. Ready to head home? Clara looked around one more time, then nodded. Ready. They rode home together through the lengthening afternoon, talking easily about mundane things, what to make for dinner, repairs needed on the barn, plans for the coming week. When they reached the ranch, Wade was waiting on the porch, and Clara felt that now familiar warmth spread through her chest. This was home. Not because it was perfect or easy or what she'd originally planned, but because it was real and earned and chosen. She'd crossed 1,000 miles to marry a stranger and found instead a life she could claim as entirely her own. She'd faced abandonment and violence and endless work, and discovered she was strong enough to survive all of it. She'd learned that the quiet girl dismissed as too fragile to matter was actually a woman capable of building libraries and families and futures from nothing but determination and refusal to disappear. That lesson, that you are more than what the world tells you, that your strength comes from surviving, not from never breaking, that choosing yourself is the bravest thing you can do, was worth every mile of the journey. Clara dismounted and walked toward her husband, her sister, her home. Behind her, the mountains rose sharp against the sky, indifferent and eternal. But here in this valley, she'd built something that mattered, not grand or legendary, but real and solid and hers. And sometimes that's the most radical thing a woman can do, survive the world's attempts to make her small, and build a life so full and true that no one can deny she exists. That was Clara's story. And it was enough.
But yeah, I mean, my next goal is to be like under 200, but I'll get there. I've gained a little bit of weight back, but that's because I took a break. Took a break from my GLP-1. I'm gonna be getting back on it soon. Soon. Daft Punk is probably one of my absolute favorites. But like for anyone else, it is. We've got an ad starting in a few minutes, y'all. Just a heads up. With all due respect, okay, what's up? What's up, buddy? What's up, Ocean? What's up? Please be careful. With what? Wait, what? I think I'm confused as to what you're saying, but I will check. Huh?